Hi. So finally we are arriving at the culmination of neoclassical model of trade, and we will be able to establish with all the tools that we acquired thus far international trade equilibrium. But look, before we do so, I wanted to go back for a second to the case we've discussed previously. So, autarky equilibrium in two countries. Okay, so here we've got production possibility frontier for Bolivia, which we know is labor, is more relatively abundant in labor. Well, this production possibility frontier is for Austria, which, as we noticed before, is more capital abundant. Okay, and now look, what did we say before is that you need to, in order to find optimal production point, we need to know the price ratio. So we use this PM to PF line. But of course, look, we know those two countries are autarkies. They do not trade with each other. So this price to a price of manufacturers to price of food ratio is specific only to Bolivia, right? This is the ratio of the two prices in Bolivia, and of course we will have a different price ratio in Austria, right? And based on those, we are able to establish at which point those two countries will be produced. And of course, we also said that because Austria is capital abundant, the price of manufacturers will be lower. Relative price of manufacturers to price of food will be lower in Austria. This is why this line is flat. And of course, in Bolivia, we expect the line to be steep because we expect for this ratio to be big. And of course, finally, we finished our graphs with utility functions or welfare functions, each separate for Bolivia and separate for Austria. And based on those, we were able to get both production and consumption points. Because look, this point B, like Bolivia, is on one hand the production point because it lies on the production possibility frontier, and is a consumption point because it lies on the indifference curve, right? And the same can be applied to Austria. And here we see that this is a production point and a consumption point for Austria because it lies on production possibility frontier and just as on indifference curve. But look, there is one more thing we didn't mention thus far, and is that there is yet another thing we should take into consideration. Well, look, if we calculated before from the consumption customer's choice model that ratio of consumption of food to ratio of to consumption of manufacturers is equal to 1 minus delta M over delta N, right? And multiply by PM over PF. But now we know a little bit more, right? Because we know that this is just for one country, right? So we can expect that, for example, this is going to be a ratio of consumption of food to consumption of manufacturing in Austria. And then we will have a different ratio in Bolivia. Now, let's notice a couple of things. Look, we will have, of course, different price ratios in Austria and Bolivia. We will have, as a consequence, we will have a different consumption to manufacture of food to consumption of manufacturers ratios in Austria and Bolivia. But look, this part is the same in both countries. Why? Look, we took this from the utility function, right? This is a parameter from a utility function. And we assume that in both countries we have the same homothetic preferences. So look, the preferences are basically condensed into these two expressions. So look, from this we can clearly see, and this is actually why we introduced this assumption of homothetic taste. We do not want the tastes to affect our analysis. And look, because we have the homothetic taste, we also have the same family of indifference curves for both countries, right? So we know that they will never intersect. But this is not the key thing here. Because look, this actually gives us very important information. Okay, let me just first, look, we already know that that in these circumstances, if those two are the same, the difference in the two countries in ratio of consumption of food to consumption of manufacturers must be solely arising from the difference in the relative prices, right? So, in this case, we can clearly say that consumption of food to consumption of manufacturers is higher in Bolivia. And this is what we see in the graph, right? In Bolivia, we consume a lot of food, a little of manufacturers, while in Austria, we consume a little of food and a lot of manufacturers. Look, this result comes solely from the differences in prices. Of course, you can say that those differences in prices comes from differences in relative capital abundance. But it doesn't really matter. Look, once we know the final result, we can actually very easily put it on a graph. Because look, let me just take yellow color and for Bolivia. And this line that you see over here that connects the origin with Bolivia the origin with the equilibrium point for Bolivia is simply equal to has a coefficient, so its slope is equal to the ratio of consumption of food to consumption of manufacturers, right? So, knowing the prices, we can establish this ratio. So, generally speaking, we can say that the slope of this line is associated with ratio CF to CM in Bolivia, which again is a result of a certain relative price in Bolivia. And by the same token, unfortunately this moment I'm missing a color, but hopefully I'm gonna find something that looks different. Okay, I'm gonna try with maybe this red will work. Okay, so now I could do the same thing for Austria, right? And this angle, so the slope of this line connecting those two origin with point A is given by ratio of food to manufacturers in Austria. Okay, so we clearly see that except for the production, for the relative capital abundance in those countries, which determines the slopes and generally the shape of production possibility frontiers, we need to also include prices. They are the price ratio, which is very important. And look, what is going to happen if now we are opening the two economies? Now the two economies are starting to trade with each other. You know, I'm going to write it here because I will need a lot of space there later. Okay, so what is happening? Look, we know that the price ratio in Bolivia is definitely higher than the price ratio in Austria, right? So, okay, let's do it like this is autarky price ratio in Austria, and this is autarky price in Bolivia. Now, what is going to happen if those countries start trading? Look, if the countries start trading with each other, and look, we are assuming there are no tariffs, there are no transportation costs, so they can trade as much as they want. What will appear are arbitrage opportunities. As you will learn a little bit later, these arbitrage opportunities are the key to entire international economies. Look, what does it mean? Look, if I know that relative price of food, if price of food generally is lower in Bolivia than in Austria, what is the rational thing to do? I should buy food in Bolivia and sell it in Austria. But I also know that the price of manufacturers in Austria is lower than in Bolivia. So what is the rational thing to do? I should buy manufacturers in Austria, sell them in Bolivia. But look, if more and more manufacturers is going on Bolivian market, there is the bigger supply, price of manufacturers is going to fall. Now, what is going to happen in Austria when we bring food from from Bolivia? Well, then the supply of food in Austria is getting bigger, so the price of food in Austria is getting smaller. How long is this going to last? Well, look, in model where we do not have any transportation costs or tariffs, it will happen until the prices in two countries will be equal. Why? Because look, then we will not have any arbitrage opportunity. You cannot take good produced in Austria, buy it cheaper and sell it for more price in Bolivia and vice versa. And look, this is actually the key to entire market process, entire market mechanism. Like those arbitrage opportunities are the things that drive prices down. So, but of course, we know that as a result, prices in two countries should go down. But at the same time, we are not interested in price of manufacturing or price of food alone, but what is going to be the ratio? And look, we can think about it in a very simple way. Look, we will expect that price of food in Austria will be going down, right? Because this is because it is cheap in Bolivia, it's expensive in Austria. So price of food is going down. Now, what is happening in Bolivia? Now, here, price of manufacturers was expensive, and price of manufacture was cheap was small in Austria. So if we bring more stuff from Austria, we expect this is going to fall. So look, what is actually happening is that price of manufacturing is becoming smaller and smaller in Bolivia, while price of food is becoming smaller and smaller in Austria. And look, here we are dividing smaller and smaller number by the same number, so we expect that this value is going to be becoming smaller and smaller and smaller from this end. Over here, we expect that we are dividing by a smaller and smaller number, so we are getting a bigger and bigger and bigger number. So look, what we will have in the middle, is equilibrium price ratio when we have international trade. Because look, remember, two things are happening. On one hand, international trade leads to the fall of prices in both countries, but the price ratio is actually going to establish somewhere in between those two. And look, this gives us very important information. Because look, now I can calculate CF over CM TR, right? Because in case of consumption opportunities, we will have that this is going to be 1 minus delta M over delta M, just like you can see over here and over here. But it's going to be PM, PF, T, R. Okay, and look, why is this important to us? Because look, we are now interested in consumption. Because look, now we are, when we will be, from this, we can say what is going to be the ratio of consumption of food to consumption of manufacturers in both countries if the goods market is merged into one, right? And look, this is telling us that we should expect this line to go somewhere in between those two. Why? Again, look, this parameter, this expression, is the same in all three cases, right? But we know that because relative price is between relative price in Austria and relative price in Belgium, so what we will get as a result is something in between these two solutions. Okay. And this actually brings us to our final graph that will actually show us everything that is happening in between those two economies. And again, I hope I'm going to make it the first time, but I cannot promise it because this graph is really, really problematic to draw. But don't worry, on the exam, explain what should be parallel to which triangle should be of exact same size as the other triangle, and everything's gonna be fine. But okay, so look, what is going to happen right now? Okay, now, again, I'm starting by drawing manufacturer's food space, and I'm going to draw two production possibility frontiers. One for Bolivia, and one for Austria. Okay, I'm going to put it here. Production possibility frontier for Austria. Okay. And first thing we need to do is we need to establish what is the level of production in those two countries. How do we do it? Well, this is very easy. All we need to do is to take the price ratio and check it where is it tangent to production possibility frontier in each country. But which price ratio are we taking? We're taking the price ratio for trading economy. So look, it's going to be somewhere in between this slope and this slope. But definitely, the companies will maximize their profits if they're going to choose the levels of production according to this line. So look, now, let's just say that this line is somewhere in the slope is somewhere in between those two. Let's just say it looks like this. Okay, so we've got that this is P M over P F in with trade. And now, look, the problem is from this, I can only establish production point, production equilibrium for Bolivia. Okay. Now, I need to use a separate line to establish production equilibrium in Austria. How do I do it? Look, I should take this line and move it parallelly until I would get a point at which this line would be tangent to the second production possibility frontier. Okay, we are assuming that those two lines, of course, are perfectly parallel to one another. I think I did a pretty nice job anyway with our two rulers. But look, this line has exactly the same slope given by PM over PF with trade, and those are of course, this is the slope somewhere in between the two corner solutions we've got in two autarkies. Okay, so now what we found over here is a point that we're going to call production equilibrium in Austria. Okay, I'm going to move this B over here. Why? You will see in a second. Okay, but look, those two are giving us only a production equilibrium. How should we find consumption equilibrium in those two countries? And look, this is why we need to have this. Because look, now it is very easy. Look, all I need to do is to rewrite this line that will show me it's gonna be. Why? Because look, production, consumption equilibrium will be at the point where indifference curve is tangent to the highest, where price ratio is tangent to the highest possible indifference curve. And of course, remember, we have assumed identical tastes in both countries. So look, in order to find it, let me just use, for example, a green color. What I would have to do is to draw a line from the origin, and the slope of this line would be given, of course, by Cm over Cf Ti. So, in trading equilibrium. And okay, it's all perfectly okay. Well, I hope just you can see everything. And look, what I need to do right now. Look, this line, this price ratio is for Austria. So now I can draw indifference curve for Austria, and I can also draw indifference curve for indifference curve for Bolivia. Okay, before we actually go to trade flows, let me just notice some things. Look, this indifference curve in trading equilibrium is higher than this indifference curve. Look, you can, if you think about it, you can see it quite easily. Look, the previous one was going through this point, right? So it would be going like this, right? So we see, first thing we should notice is, as a result of trade, customers are better off, right? Because they can afford more of both goods, so they are happier. They are at the indifference curve that is further from the origin, right? Because this indifference curve, the old one, would be somewhere over here. And look, clearly we can see the same for Austria, because for Austria, this indifference curve would be going somewhere over here, right? Somewhere over here. Still, so look, the customers are better in both countries. But look, can we see it somewhere else? Well, look, this is what we said. What has happened as a result of international arbitrage is that price of food is in Austria stayed the same. Went down, while price of manufacturers stayed the same. While in Bolivia, price of manufacturers went down, while price of food stayed the same. So customers have better choices. Now with the same income, they can actually purchase more goods. So of course, the customers in both countries are better off and they are happier. So because of that, so they are on the higher indifference curve. So look, this is a result that we get from neoclassical model of trade, but this is actually the result you will see in every model of trade. You will see that actually trade, international trade, is always making customers better off. Of course, if it's not distorted, but the general idea is if we trade, our customers are better off. So our society is on the higher indifference curve. So we clearly see that those indifference curves represent more happiness for the customers, higher utility than those two. Okay, but now, look, in point A, over here, in autarky, that was consumption and production equilibrium, and the same was for point B. Look, here we have production equilibrium for Bolivia and for Austria, but consumption equilibrium is in a different place. Look, this is how many goods, and this is how many goods Austria is consuming. This is how many goods Bolivia is consuming, right? Look, we clearly see that now Austria consumes a little bit less of manufactures, but consumes vastly more of food. On the other hand, Bolivia, Bolivia consumes less of food and more of manufacturers. About the sizes, we will talk a little bit later. And look, how is this possible, right? Well, of course, the answer is through the magic of international trade. So, look, here I have consumption point for Austria. Here I have consumption point for Bolivia. Okay, so how this magic of international trade works? Look, we are now what we do is that let's just say that now we is Austria. Austria is producing this many manufacturers, but look, Austria is consuming this many manufacturers, so less. So what do we have over here? Over here, we've got export of manufacturing from Austria to Bolivia, right? This is the part of export. This is the part of manufacturers that is produced but not consumed in Austria, so it's going to be exported. And look, over here, we see this from the other perspective. Look, this is how much food Austria is producing, and this is how much food Austria is consuming. So what must be this? Where does this come from? Well, this comes from, of course, import. This comes from import. So import of food. This is the food that is imported from Bolivia. And look, here we are getting that this kind of a triangle, and we use these triangles actually to show the benefits of trade. Okay, now let's just see what happens in Bolivia. Okay, because look, first we see that Bolivia produces this much food, but consumes only this much food. So, where is this food going? Well, it must be exported. So here is export of food from Bolivia to Austria. So look, if those graphs would be done perfectly, this side of the triangle and this side of this triangle that we're going to have over here would be exactly equal. But as long as I am not a robot, they are not. But of course, on the final exam, if you will have to draw something like this, just please remember to mention, because okay, maybe some of you will be able to make perfect triangles. I was never able to do it, but just write that this side is equal to this side is equal to this. Okay, and finally, our last conclusion is that, well, look, now Bolivia produces this much manufactures, but it consumes this much. So what do we need to have on this side? This is import of manufacturers. Okay, and again, this is the triangle. And look, we are assuming, of course, that those two triangles, even though you cannot see this because my graph is not very good, are of exactly the same size. And look, what does it make sense? Okay, look, because export, we've got just two countries in this model. So export of M must be equal to import of M. Right? And look, what do we see? That actually export of Austria, because look, this is exports of Austria, which is imports of Bolivia, they need to be equal to one another, you know, in absolute value. But that well, doesn't matter, right? Those are the goods that we are sending in exchange for food. Well, what is the exchange ratio? Of course, PM to PF. Okay, but and you can actually, you have this ratio indicated by the slope of this line. Okay, and look, what do we have over here? Here we have import of food, but who is importing food? Austria is importing food. And this is exactly equal to the export of food by Bolivia. And look, then what we have established actually from this model is that Austria is exporting manufacturers while Bolivia is exporting food. Well, they import the other good. And look, this is the Heckscher-Ohlin proposition. Look, we actually go from differences in capital abundance. Austria is relatively capital abundant, while Bolivia is relatively labor abundant. So what happens after the trade interaction is established between these two countries is that those countries start to specialize. Now look, now Austria is producing more manufacturers, while Bolivia is producing more food. And look, again, this is something that we can get simply from the slopes of the line, but I'm not going to be discussing it because adding anything else here would just make it even more messy. Okay, now, so we know that that Austria is capital abundant, Bolivia is labor abundant. What do they do in international trade? Well, they export the goods in which use relatively abundant factor more intensively. And look, production of manufacturers requires more capital. Is more capital intensive, while production of food is more labor intensive. So look, the specialized, according to actually their comparative advantage, but expressed in a different way, because the advantage of Austria is that it has more capital per worker, while in Bolivia we have more relatively more labor than capital. So the country is specialized, and now they are exporting. They are exporting the goods that are used intensively, the factor that they have relatively in abundance. Okay, and look, this is the most important graph from the entire model. Please know how to draw it. Those two, right? I'm not gonna look, in the next video I want to tell you two things. First thing is like generally associated with your exam. Like what should you, because look, we spent a lot of time on neoclassical model of trade. We've done it in almost every detail possible, and probably you have enough of all the derivations I've done throughout this part of the course. So I want to just tell you what is important. The second thing I wanted to discuss with you are policy implications of this model. So what actually we learned from neoclassical model of trade. Okay, and those two things are going to be the subject of our next video. Okay, see you in the next video.